Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blue Mondays, the GLORIO Blog's Eureka 7 recap podcast. As always, I am your host, Zigg, and I am joined by my delightful foster sons. There is Aqua Gaze. Hello, Aqua.
Thanks, Papa.
Yes, call me Daddy. And there is also G. Hello, G.
Could you say that, like, this behavior is, like, a form of evil woman, or merely problematic?
I would describe it as problematic, but perhaps not in the way that you are angling for, let's say. There is some decent evil woman content in our near future, but I don't think we get too much of it this fortnight there. This episode, we are going to be talking about episode 23, Differencia, and episode 24, Paradise Lost. A couple of very character-focused episodes this week, you know, unlike other giant robot shows. Eureka 7 is about the characters.
I was about to say, unlike other Eureka 7 episodes, these two are about the characters.
Yeah, you know, there are so many permutations of that joke you can make at this point. Unlike other Eureka 7 episodes, these episodes are about the robots. I'm going to kick this off, though, by asking Aquagaze, here's your regular music quiz. Do you know both of these episodes are named for a single artist? Do you know who that artist is?
Huh. No, I didn't know that because I had some guesses for the second one.
Yeah, the second one is a stock phrase, Paradise Lost.
Right. But I didn't really associate it with the first one. I didn't know that they were both referencing the same artist.
No, and to be fair, like again, this is a case where I don't really expect you to know because the titles are so generic to a certain extent.
Right.
But I'm making a fairly big deal out of this because these two episodes reference the most commonly referenced artist for Eureka 7 episode titles, and that artist is famous Japanese electronic music pioneer Ryuichi Sakamoto.
Oh, all right.
Oh, shit, the GOAT.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anybody who knows anything about Japanese music knows who Sakamoto is, but for those of you who are not aware, Sakamoto is as I said, a legendary figure in Japanese music, and especially in the worlds of electronic and synth music. He is something, he's no longer with us, sadly, something of a musical renaissance man. He is generally regarded as a forefather of synth pop, garage, techno, trance, all sorts of stuff. He composed the soundtrack for several films, won an Oscar, a Grammy, a BAFTA, and 2 Golden Globes. Generally seen as one of the forefathers of the hip-hop sound because he was one of the first composers to favour the TR-808 drum machine, which became a legendary sound of hip-hop and techno tracks there. And generally,
so famous that it's often mentioned in hip-hop tracks, right?
Yes.
The 808.
Yes, and generally he is just one of the most important musical figures that Japan has ever produced, quite frankly. I should mention as well, Sakamoto was also a member of the pioneering synth pop band Yellow Magic Orchestra, which is generally regarded as one of the very first synth pop bands. The dude has done everything, been everything, saw everything, passed away a couple of years ago, but a legendary figure in Japanese music, as I said.
Yes.
Yellow Magic Orchestra are very much one of the bands that first set like Japanese pop music on the on the map, like that allowed Japan to develop its own style of pop music rather than just aping what was coming out of the States and the UK at the time. Right?
I think what I wanted to emphasize was that although Sakamoto is, you know, an untouchable legend in Japan, he is also famous worldwide for many different reasons. So it's not a stretch to say he might be the most famous musician Japan has ever produced, really.
Very, very prolific, and I mean, very interestingly, right? Like, because of like the very sort of like somewhat skewed lens that I think the West gets on Japanese culture. Like, I mean, you know, I'm not about to go, what's that joke about, like, Persona 5 fans hearing jazz for the first time or whatever?
I mean, that's just a variation of the getting a lot of Boss Baby vibes. From
sure, getting Persona 5 vibes from this music. But the interesting thing, right, is because, like, Sakamoto was very prolific. didn't actually work in anime that much, right? I think the main thing everybody kind of remembers him from is Royal Space Force, the Gainax feature film.
I should have mentioned that. Yes,
beautiful soundtrack.
Yeah.
I mean, again, kind of put my own ass out here, right? Because obviously that is kind of how I was exposed to his music.
Yes.
But the thing I think you could say about him is like you can't throw a rock in any direction in Japan's musical scene, whether in anime or games or not, without hitting something that is like influenced by his body of work.
Yes, and, as I said, he was something of a Renaissance man as well. He did compose some film soundtracks, as I mentioned. He did some acting as well. He is just an incredibly talented and incredibly skilled individual there. Regarding these tracks in particular, Differencia is from his 1980 album B2 Unit, which is generally seen as the magnum opus of his early years. It includes a huge number of tracks and stylistic touches which influenced a vast number of genres. Paradise Lost is from his 1984 album Ongaku Zukan. But rest assured, we will be seeing a lot more of Mr. Sakamoto as the series goes on. As I said, he is the most commonly referenced composer, musician in these titles by quite a distance. So with that said, let's move on to the first episode 23, Differencia. And we start in domestic bliss, really, right?
Yeah. I mean, Renton continues to get nice food and compliments and examples of positive masculinity from his new mom and dad.
Yes, the show cannot resist another cheap bra joke as well.
Oh, yeah. They just love doing this, right?
there is something like almost. Though I mean, it is just like it is a cheap joke, to be clear. But I do think there's almost something very like I think intentionally like a comparative, right, of this sequence at the beginning, which is like Renton, helping around on the Swan. I believe that's the name of their ship.
Yes, it is,
and like. Doing all the chores that he kind of like internalized doing from the get-go, but here he is being like, he's getting positive reinforcement, right?
Yeah, it's not even subtext here. He just says it. It's like, wow, all the things I was doing that I got shouted at for, now I'm getting praised for. And even the joke with the bra is kind of like a contrast between Talho's very shitty aggression and like Ray's much more benign sort of mom attitude.
I just find it very funny how even in that context, this is still an anime, and so they just cannot resist doing the whole, I'm a woman, I should be careful, I should not be careless around men, because God forbid they see one of my brassiers and they become overcome with an insatiable lust to ravage me.
Okay, clearly, I think Ray is teasing Renton here, right? Like, I think that is very
It's a little knowing, certainly.
Yes. I think Ray is teasing Renton because, like, look, like, Renton, again, 14, 15-year-old boy, right? Like, of course he's gonna be like, brah, like, it's, and I think Ray is just getting her jabs in. I don't think it's quite like, I gotta watch out for this ravenous beast. I mean,
it's
already got
funny
Charles
how
here, so
that is one of the, like, persisting anime tropes.
Jokes, yes.
I think it stands out a little more here because, like, the show in general, but also in particular in this arc, has largely not been very anime in a great deal of its presentation for a while, so it does kind of stick out a little bit. But overcoming those minor little domestic hiccups aside, the Swan has arrived in a new city, and Renton has a passport suddenly. Passport in the name of Renton Beams.
Yeah, look at this shitty little signature.
Yes.
Renton Beams.
In some way, look, Renton's a kid, he don't know any better, but it's like maybe the promptness at which Ray and Charles were able to get their hands on a falsified passport should have...
That was my point as well. It's like, you've been with them for like, let's say a week or two at most. Yeah. Like, where did you obtain this extremely legit looking passport from? Maybe that's a question you should be asking.
But yes, the pretense. Oh, go ahead.
No, there's some interesting details on Renton's passport, because I actually ended up pausing on the screen. And I think this is the first time we actually learn like the name of the country that this is set in.
Yes.
The UFPT. So I'm
we've-
assuming UF stands for United Federation.
Yes, we have heard the state called the Federation a few times now.
But then what does the PT stand for?
I honestly cannot remember what the PT stands
Playable
for.
teaser.
I don't know. Planets, whatever.
Planets. Yeah, that was my guess. But then again,
born,
we have
December 28th. So
yes,
one of the worst possible birthdays right after Christmas.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
So,
this also shows that like Renton was that kid in class who was always a year younger than everyone else because his birthday is late.
Yeah.
And that kind of tracks, honestly.
I mean, that I'll point out that works. That's true in the Japanese school system. In the West, of course, he would be one of the older members of the class.
Yeah.
But yes, being born around Christmas is a nightmare. I have a friend who was born on Christmas Day, and unless you very specifically take steps, you are always going to be the second most important thing happening. So, but yes, it's
the pretense here, anyways. Like the reason why Renton has a passport is because Ray and Charles are inviting Renton to accompany them on a gig, right?
Yes. And I think one of the interesting things here is this is the first time in this show we have really been to kind of like a major urban area that is not in the middle of a firefight or a bombing or, abandoned.
Well, I was going to say, Zigg, you say that like, yeah, I mean, yes, it is not a city under bombardment, but it is clearly a city under military lockdown, right? Because the context of why Ray and Charles are here, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think that the point I was trying to make is that even though it is clearly a highly tense situation, this is kind of like the most urbanized, most city area we have seen for a while. Like we have been in towns and cities before, but they have mostly been, quite rustic Mediterranean style buildings. This is kind of like, this is a proper city. It has skyscrapers. It has all of that stuff.
It has a big old Midgar like tower in the middle with large spotlights.
I mean, have you noticed that they all have that? Like every settlement has had one of those because that's where they launch from. That's where all the trapar,
the spaceport.
Yeah, basically.
But yes, I mean the point is like even here. I mean, I think maybe there's a good point to be seen here, right? Which is even here in like a city that could be like read as part of the Imperial Core, law and order is still like kind of collapsing in the world of Eureka 7, right?
Absolutely.
Like we want to continue the theme of this is a world that is slowly dying. Ray and Charles are here at the city in the wake of a terrorist attack, one that has supposedly been carried out by the Vodarac, right? So tensions are high. Political violence is a very real aspect of life in Eureka 7.
Yeah.
Weird.
And this sure is showing like its true colors as a show made in the early 2000s, huh?
Mm-hmm.
How do you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of like post 9/11 hysteria vibes going on in this episode, starting from the tense border security to the whole thing with the Vodarac being blamed for the terrorist strike, and as a result, everything that looks or sounds like a Vodarac being immediately like threatened or treated with disrespect and bigotry.
I mean, I think I see what you're saying, but also like that is a theme like that is as old as humanity to a certain extent.
I mostly just mean the very specific vibe of like the security theater gives me extreme.
Yeah, I think creators are. I think it is fair to say that creators are like. I mean, yes, they are speaking to universal concepts, but also I think creators are influenced by recent events, right? Like for Eureka 7, I mean, Eureka 7, one of the like post 9/11 mecha anime.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's the thing, right? If you in the more traditional like fantasy or sci-fi story, you would have, of course, these stories of discrimination and inequality and bigotry. But I think that the sort of minority being targeted in a story that is not as close to 9/11, it would be more like a racial minority or a different species of some sort. Whereas here they are specifically targeting a religion.
Religion, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I don't think it's a coincidence that the portrayal of the Vodarac people involved here shifts from, up to now, the Vodarac we have seen have been vaguely Buddhist-coded monk-type people. Here, the people are urban, black or
Right.
well, you wouldn't say African American, but people of African origin.
Right. I mean, there's even some African art elements in the decoration of the hospital room and the clothes they're wearing, right?
I mean,
very Afro-futurist aesthetic almost.
The aesthetic that actually these the Vodarac family here reminded me of, I don't know if it's just the father in particular, but there's a slight Malcolm X vibe to him, honestly. The short hair, the smart suit, the John Lennon granny glasses.
In some ways, the read I almost got, and we, to be clear, this family is, or the plight of this family is, a classic, episodic conflict of the week, right?
It's a morality.
I don't think, but I think you could almost read this family as they to me feel like what you often see in many of these types of movements and demographics, which is probably a wealthier family, someone,
absolutely,
a wealthier member of an oppressed demographic. The job is basically that they are requesting that Ray and Charles transport their daughter, who they have deemed as terminal, I guess is the idea, right?
Basically beyond saving,
right. She is in terminal condition. They asked to transport her to the Vodarac Holy Land so that she may die in the land of their forefathers, right?
Just as a reminder, we have seen the Vodarac Holy Land, and it's a bombed out hell. So
yes. So it's not exactly the most peaceful place to go, but there's a good bit later in the episode where, I don't want to skip too much, but I'll just say,
it's all right. Just hop about.
We're talking about the read on this family, right? It seems like they actually probably could have gotten her the care that she needed, but purposely forgoed it or gave it up or let somebody else take their place in line, right? That seems to be the implication, right? Is they donated the opportunity to get life-saving treatment to somebody else at this hospital, right?
The read I got was less that they had willingly given up their place in line and more that they did not feel it was worth fighting the obvious prejudice around them.
Sure, I think that is probably also valid.
Right, yeah. It's not necessarily that they have actively decided that their daughter is beyond saving, but there is a certain recognition of the reality of their circumstances, right? And I think that tracks quite well with the Vodarac philosophy we have seen thus far, right? Which is very, a kind of in tune with nature, very accepting of death to a certain extent, and the core conflict here, obviously, is that Renton does not understand this acceptance. He does not comprehend the difficulty and complexity of the circumstances, or to a certain extent why the parents would want this for their daughter.
It's a very interesting I think in general this episode is very interesting from the perspective of how it builds Renton as a character, right? Because in some ways this is one of the episodes that to me reminded me the most that Renton is still a kid.
Yes, absolutely.
He is a kid with a good heart and a willingness to try to change the world for a better. And these are important traits that will become the foundation of how he becomes, the sort of hero of this story, so to speak, right? But in this moment, he's naive. He doesn't. And it's not wrong, right? He's not wrong that it is unjust that this girl should die because she happens to be of the same religion as the purported culprits of a terrorist attack, right? He's Charles even says it, right? You're completely right, that this is a bad world that allows things like this to happen, but the way Renton goes about it, right, is so almost willfully naive, right? I mean, the rest of this episode is especially now that I'm older, like there are parts of this episode that are hard to watch, man. I mean,
it's an emotionally charged episode, and the overwhelming thing which the audience is clearly meant to recognize is that Renton's heart is in the right place, as you say. He is genuinely trying to help, and he is genuinely trying to do what he thinks is right, but he lacks the life experience. He lacks the understanding of the situation. He lacks the sort of worldliness to understand that there are more checks and balances in this situation than simply what is right and wrong, right? And I think when we're all growing up, we sometimes we have to learn to understand that sometimes the right thing is not necessarily the expedient thing to do under the current circumstances. And this, we have seen this come up again and again when it comes to Renton's character building, right? That part of his growth as a character is the demolishing of his very simple ideas of right and wrong, good and bad, white and black, and sort of breaking them down into a more realistic, more nuanced view of the world.
I think it's even more fundamental than that. Even like as you said, this isn't just about growing up. This is a thing that many adults seemingly lack or struggle with. The idea that your, let's call it absolute metaphysical values, right? Life is good, death is bad. That there are people who, for cultural, religious reasons, may not necessarily agree with that view, who may have a very different view on these fundamental concepts. And I think it's very interesting that the show posits that as a sign of maturity, right? The ability to understand that the Vodarac have fundamentally different ways of looking at death, that death is not necessarily a grave injustice or a tragedy, but merely a fact of life.
Yes, and I think there is a very literal metaphor later on in this episode where the hospital crowd attack Renton for bringing somebody dressed in the colour of death into their midst. And of course, the girl is dressed in all white, which traditionally we would associate with goodness and life, but plays a little bit more differently in the context of a Buddhist Shinto country like Japan, where white is the funeral color. Right?
That is a perfect example, right, of how white is associated with pureness in the West, whereas in the East it is more commonly seen as an expression of death.
Right, and it's a very literal manifestation of Renton not being able to read the sign because he simply does not comprehend that the sign is there. Right, it's not that he misinterpreted it; it's just that he missed it entirely.
I mean, the thing is, it's that, but it's also the more like archetypical. Don't do that Muslim shit in here. This is America, like. This very, like, it works on multiple levels.
Yeah.
Just this showing this contrast between values, between cultures, and also showing which way of addressing these differences are legitimate and which ones are simply bigoted.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's an important nuance to make.
And because we are talking about the Renton plot here and the story through Renton, it's worth pointing out that by doing what he does, Renton ensures that the worst of all possible worlds happens. With the very best intentions, the worst result comes out right. The girl dies before she can reach the Holy Land. Because of this, because of what's happened, Charles offers to transport her there and waives his fee, which is a nice moment for Charles, but also, it's probably what you would expect given the trouble that's been caused, and so effectively nobody has gotten what they want.
Nobody's happy. Nobody is like satisfied, or nobody finds closure.
I think, but the integral thing is, and that is kind of the entire reason why this episode exists almost, is that this episode follows a familiar pattern, right? Renton runs away, reset the counter, from his parental figures. He tries to do the right thing and ends up causing some kind of trouble. But the key differing factor here is that Charles forgives him. Charles says, look, you made a mistake, but you were trying to do the right thing. With the implication that this is part of being a kid. You mess up, you learn from your mistakes, but the key factor is that you tried to do the right thing, as opposed to Holland, who only looked at the trouble Renton caused and punished him accordingly.
Beats him up.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's actually really important, and I think that's why, like, we'll probably get to this next. We also need to talk about like the Holland half of this episode as well, right? Because I think it's so important to like set up this situation where like Renton screws up, but because Ray and Charles, primarily Charles, like know how to communicate with Renton and are willing to like explain these things to him, right? Because they view Renton as a child, whereas often on the Gecko State, Renton is treated as a small adult. And I think like that key difference like really like is illustrated in this episode, where Charles mostly like, again, I mean, look, I'm sure, based on what we know about Ray Charles, maybe Charles is more hung up about, well, we just lost a paying gig here. But the point is, like, he treats Renton's mistake with compassion and understanding. He's like, look, kid, you messed up, and I'm going to tell you why, right? Whereas, like, I think if Renton had done the same thing on the Gecko, we're probably just treated to another 90 seconds of Holland beating the piss out of a child, right?
I will point out Renton does get hit this episode again, but it's not by Ray or Charles, it's by the mob.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you're right, G, and I think what's extremely important is that we see Charles, even though it is not his fault, he recognises that as Renton's parental figure, it is his job to take responsibility.
Yes.
And if we pivot to the Holland half of this episode, the Holland half of this episode is about how he will not take responsibility. And
Holland refuses to take responsibility.
It's almost comical. Like the Renton,
they do play it for laughs. Like
the Renton half of this episode is like this morality tale about differing values and responsibility and good intentions and their results. And then the Holland half is just a Faulty Towers episode, where Holland tells a lie and then like comically has to keep the lie hidden until it spirals
and
out
gets
of
more and more people involved in the lie, right?
Yes,
so it's the long and short of it is that now that Eureka is awake and ambulatory, she's like, where's Renton? I haven't seen him. And everybody's like, ask Holland.
I do want to point out I do want to point out that there's a really good bit of cinematography here where they cut from Renton opening a door straight to Eureka. That's a really, really effective cut.
Yeah, and then they do it again the second time when Hilda comes in and Eureka asks her, where's Renton? And then it cuts to Charles and Ray asking, where's Renton? When they go looking for him after he's run away with the girl.
Just some good, solid filmmaking stuff here. But yes, I mean, the implication here seems to be that a considerable amount of time has passed between episodes here, right? Because Eureka is not 100%, but she's definitely on the mend. She's out and about there. We do get the adorable sequence of Mater and Link singing with her.
Their dumb song.
Their dumb song.
Doing the I made this meme.
Yes. Mater trying to plagiarize immediately there.
I mean, kids will always try to one-up one another when it comes to stuff like that, right?
You get but basically Holland says that Renton went shopping with Talho and Hilda. He'll be back in 2 or 3 days, and then suddenly now shopping. Women be shopping, and now Talho and Hilda are dragged into the lie.
Yeah, we get some very good Metal Gear Hilda here for a bit.
Yeah.
Where she's like sneaking around
corners. Yeah.
I do love the implication that Hilda has to man the store now, because when Renton's not here, Hilda just has to do everything.
Yes. I think, once again in this side of the episode, we see the very strong ideological difference between Talho and Holland, right? Talho is very much, you should just come out and tell her, and Holland is, what if I did everything except that? Which ties back into their whole sort of polar opposite things about taking responsibility and running away from your problems and stuff. I do think it's interesting that although Talho disapproves of what Holland is doing, she doesn't break the facade.
Right.
She is still loyal enough to him to maintain the facade.
I mean, on one hand, is it loyalty, or is it like an
Stand by your
expectation
man.
that, well, there's that, but I think there's also the bit of the expectation that, like, look, this is your mess to clean up, right? Because here's the thing, I think any other member of the crew could have already told Eureka the truth, but there's this sort of unspoken agreement that, like, nah, dude, this is on you. Like, you have to be the one who tells Eureka where Renton went.
And I think it's also kind of like a thing that there's probably still a part of Talho that kind of believes in Holland's dream, that like believes in the Holland who defected from the military and took Eureka with them, looking for a better way of living.
I mean, on some level, she must still believe in him because they are still together, obviously.
I mean, the amount of shit Talho puts up with, I mean, it's
but she's too good for him.
I think
it really is.
I think also, in this episode, we begin to see even the crew are kind of beginning to turn against Holland, right? We have this sort of gathering where Hilda once again reiterates that the fact that he said that we shouldn't look for him really means we should look for him, to be honest,
yes.
But we have Mathieu claiming that he has an extensive underground network of DJs that feed him information.
Yeah.
Renton was spotted at a sweet rave.
yeah, it's very good.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a little bit of like, it is very classic Gecko state, right? That they are all just like loudly debating what to do about the situation while Holland is in the room.
Yeah, it's a good cut where they show him that he's right there,
Right? They're all like, "Oh man, really? Somebody should tell Eureka."
It's not. It's not quite full blown mutiny yet, but they are definitely muttering against him at this point.
Yes, they are getting in their jabs in at like, well, Holland's just coping because Eureka's clearly in love with Renton and Holland can't handle it.
I love how like when the first thing Eureka does when she wakes up is she drops the L-bomb on Misha, and Misha's like, sorry, can you repeat that again? And then she immediately like calls up the small council of Gecko State to discuss that Eureka has finally entered her obligatory Rei Ayanami XP What is Love arc.
Yeah, and I mean, there's one part of this episode I want to talk about which really rings false for me, though, and this is the Hap claiming Holland, by not looking for him, Holland was actually looking after Renton's welfare. And
yes,
I'm sorry, I just do not buy this. I just don't buy it at all.
That is, I mean, look, they said Hap and Holland are childhood friends. Yeah. That is just classic. Like, look, man, I've known this guy since middle school. I know the intricacies of his mind. It's all, he's playing four-dimensional chess. He's actually looking out for Renton. You see?
I guess, but like the way
I'm mostly joking, but yes, it's a bad justification.
Yeah, the way it's written and presented is very much Hap is expositing for the audience what we are meant to understand about this scene, and I just don't think it doesn't work. The character's not really earned it. And
it's just, he actually cared all along, but then immediately it shows that he doesn't, because he still does not admit to Eureka that he is the reason why Renton left. Yeah. And also, he like wrecks this bar stool and hurts Doggy, so he just moves on to hurting another sweet boy.
Well, yes.
Nothing wrong.
And I think that's a really important point that you made, Aqua, about how even when Holland is backed into a corner and has to do the right thing, he still can't quite bring himself to go all the way. He still has to sort of muddy the truth there, and that makes a little more sense, because I think he is trying to protect Eureka and protect their relationship, but actually what he has done has hurt her a great deal more there.
I have a more negative impression. I don't think he is trying to protect Eureka. He's trying to cling to this idea he has of Eureka as this emotionless doll that completely depends on him. And in the light of some things that are revealed in the next episode, that only affirms my belief in this. Like, it is mostly about his ego and about how Eureka needs to be kept,
I mean,
like, unaware and unemotional in order for him to continue that ego trip.
Right.
Like,
I mean, we've talked about this in prior episodes that like so much of Holland becomes so much more apparent when you realize like Holland thought he was the chosen one in some ways. Like, he won't admit it. I mean, he has enough self-awareness to know he's an adult, and an adult saying I should have been the chosen one, not this teenager, would look even more pathetic. But like, so much of the subtext around Holland is like he thought like he was the one who was going to rescue Eureka from the clutches of the military, and like, again, not necessarily romantic, but like be the one who forms a bond with Eureka, right?
Yes.
And watching like Eureka like become so much more attached to Renton. Like, I mean, again, Talho constantly like needles like Holland about this, right? It's
and this is why I've been saying that although you wouldn't necessarily describe Holland's attraction to Eureka as romantic per se, there is still a definite tension between him and her, him and Renton, and him and Talho, right? Regarding this sort of weird love dodecahedron, whatever it is, where Talho is not entirely comfortable with the way he behaves around Eureka. And I think this plays into her desire to make him more honest, because from her perspective, Eureka being more attached to Renton is a good thing. And so there's an ulterior motive.
Oh, there is definitely, yes.
Well.
Talho is not entirely selfless in this situation, right? There's definitely a little bit of like, right, like, yeah, if she could get Renton and Eureka together, maybe that could get Holland to stop obsessing over Eureka, right?
Yes, I mean, the thing is, of all the main characters, I think it's clear that Talho does not like Eureka as a person the most. I think that, and, that's not necessarily a horrible moral failing on her part. She has legitimate reasons for it, but it shows that these relationships are very complex, right? There is a very complicated web between these characters, and you're absolutely right, Aqua. When I said he's trying to protect Eureka, what I probably should have said was he's trying to protect his relationship with Eureka, right? He is trying to hide the fact that he is responsible for Renton leaving, but by doing that, he's willing to make her believe that she is responsible for Renton leaving, and that's obviously very damaging to her, as we will see. One last thing that I want to talk about this episode before we move on to episode 24. There's a whole bunch of stuff that they do throughout this episode to make it very obvious that the dying Vodarac girl is meant to be an analog to Eureka in terms of Renton's attachment to her, but also in the narrative. They look very similar for a start. Now that Eureka has her kind of like short cropped hair, they look very similar. But there's the terrific sequence at the end where Renton is monologuing about how he didn't understand the Vodarac girl. He didn't understand her situation. He didn't understand how to reach her. And it's overlaid with Eureka sort of hopelessly searching through the kind of debris of what's left of Renton's possessions, and it's a really great example of two scenes combining into one meaning there, because it's very obvious that the things that Renton is projecting onto this girl is also how he feels about Eureka, right? He couldn't reach her. He couldn't.
Right. It's his feeling. It's his feelings of like his inability to save the people around him.
Yes, and in the same way, we see that Eureka is bereft of that connection. She feels lost, and it's. This is a very emotional and very sort of sad episode almost, even though there's quite a lot of goofy comedy in it. We see the difficulties that both of our main characters are having, and I think this is also a really good episode for Ray and Charles, right? They show maturity and sympathy in dealing with Renton. They take responsibility. They get some good actiony stuff. Ray gets to race around in a jeep. Charles gets to menace all the rioters with his spearhead.
I mean, he gets to do the coolest thing, which is like being interrogated by the cops and being like, "You're gonna let me out of here in 5 seconds,"
right? Yes.
And then like,
we didn't even get into that, right? But like, yes, during Renton's travails around the city, right, he is almost. He's almost at the hands of mob justice, right? Like a mob of vigilantes are about to take him and the girl out, and then Charles gets to do the cool thing of flying in with his robot.
Yeah, but I think the interrogation scene, and like they take care to mention Dominic's name. Also, Dominic is captain now, apparently.
This guy just keeps failing upwards. Huh?
Yes, but like it's kind of in the midst of what is a very strong episode for Ray and Charles. It's kind of a dark connection back to the more sinister side of their
definitely.
character.
I mean, I would definitely say that like I really love this like set of episodes around here. I really love the Ray and Charles stuff just because kind of similar to like what we talked about like last week, right? It's like Ray and Charles are characters who like possess great degrees of like empathy is probably not exactly the right word considering like everything, but like great degrees of like compassion and care for the people around them, for those that they love.
They have multiple dimensions.
Yes, and I think we could definitely get into this even more in the next episode here. But like even in this episode, right? Like the boundless patience they have for Renton, right? I mean, at the end of this episode, right? Like, what do they say? They're like, raising an adolescent son isn't so bad, right? Like,
yeah, it's a cute moment.
Yeah, like it's like hey, like this is what it means to raise, a kid who's like becoming an adult in this world, right? And they kind of take it on the chin in a way that is like just again so different from the Gecko state, right?
So I have a hypothetical question here, and this is not to do with anything that's on screen, to be clear, but do we think Ray and Charles are unable to have children of their own? Because that is the very strong vibe I get from them, right? Because they are delighted to have a child. They want this boy to be their son. And to me, that says to me that they are not able to start a family of their own accord. And, we never get anything in the fiction to say whether this is true or false. But as sort of like a piece of kind of like an undercurrent, I think that there's a lot of symbolism there to back it up.
I think that makes sense. Yeah. What I wanted to say about Ray and Charles is that like there's a kind of tension because you get the feeling that the other shoe is about to drop at any moment, right? That at any moment they will actually reveal themselves to be bastards who are just using Renton for their own gains. And that moment just never comes.
No, and I think it's a testament to the writing that moment never comes, because that would be such an easier thing to do. Right.
That is like the obvious thing to do of like, whereas this shows that there can be like genuinely good people whose goals simply do not align with yours. And that's something that is also...
There's a sequence at the end of the second of these episodes where Ray almost tries to be that person. Right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I was going to bring that up when we get there.
The schemer, but she cannot because she genuinely loves Renton too much, right? Like it's like she cannot bring her. Like they almost try to do the like, haha, yes, we were just manipulating you all along, but it's like no, like these two genuinely loved Renton, and that's what makes the conclusion of the next episode like all the more like heartbreaking for everyone involved.
I mean, let's move into that next episode because we're pretty much there, so to speak. Okay, so let's move on to episode 24, Paradise Lost. And we begin this episode with a crash.
Holland drunkenly crashes his mech into what do you call that? The landing strip, the runway of the Gecko.
I would call it a catapult. But yes, Holland has been arrested for a DUI, and no, he's just so distracted.
He's just so I do not pity him because Talho explicitly says that he never follows the regulations. So I don't know, man. Burn your ass. You got to sit on the blisters.
Is that a saying? I'll take your word for it.
It might be a saying in Dutch that we don't use in English.
But yes.
The one thing I really enjoy about this opening scene is that like Holland starts to try and open up to Misha, and she just straight away goes, "I'm not your counselor." Leave it.
It's very good. Like God bless Misha. She's like, look, I got a doctorate in physical medicine. All right, like I'm don't like this PhD doesn't mean I'm here to listen to your fucking problems. Like, go talk to your girlfriend.
I'm already like way below my pay grade, being the like med on your shitty like bohemian surfer ship, when I could work at a hospital and make twice as much.
Yeah,
like,
but
twice. That's generous. She's
just the straight up no bullshit.
Gets paid on the Gecko State.
I mean, the status of people being paid to work for the Gecko State is, let's say, a bit up in the air. But it's fun that she just immediately sort of snaps him back and stops any sort of realization immediately.
Yes. It is a nice bit of characterization, right? Because I think in some ways it really does reflect like the many ways in which Holland is such a deeply immature individual, right?
He's just this petulant child terrorizing the entire Gecko State, and everyone is just like, at this point, they're just rolling their eyes and being like, "Yep, that's Holland."
Like, I don't think it's meant to be like the subtext, right? But Misha is like probably the oldest female member of the Gecko State, right?
Oldest female member, certainly.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and so there's almost a little bit of like, is Holland like projecting an almost like matronly, like, but you're an old lady and you're a doctor, you have to listen to my problems.
The combination of an older lady and like a medical figure certainly projects her as kind of like a motherly role to the crew, but she just cold cocks him completely here, and it's great.
It's very good.
It's also very funny that in a kind of very dark way, that the image that Eureka is pining over is this ridiculous magazine cover of Renton dressed up as a fake Italian.
It's so it's funny, but it's also so sad.
I mean, especially when she puts on the tracksuit.
Exactly.
It is adorably pathetic.
No, I mean, like Gidget's reaction is like spot on, right? Where it's like you almost cannot help but like cry at like the sad dog like vibes that Eureka's giving off.
The combination of the stupid tracksuit, like her misery, and her recent scars, and like
her little cancer patient hat.
Yeah, just make it look like she's
the ramen box around, you know.
It's like she looks like a kicked puppy, and
she looks like she's walking around doing the like sad Charlie Brown walk from Arrested Development.
Yes, it's so
and it is it is equal parts funny but also sad. She is
for sure.
One little detail here, which I think is kind of out of character but is very funny, is that when the gang spying on her, a Scooby stacked outside the door is there, which is not traditionally one of the characters we associate with this gang of troublemakers, but
shenanigans.
But it's funny to see him there.
I needed to add one more head to the stack to make it funny.
Yeah.
We also get like Dark Moondoggy here, who's like bitter and upset because he got hit with a chair last episode.
Hey, he has a right to be moody. Yeah, that hurt.
It's just very funny to see him kind of like sulky and indignant rather than just.
I do want to say one thing before we move on.
Yeah,
Gidget, girl, get an electric toothbrush, please. You are in that shop looking for new toothbrushes every day.
Maybe she's just one of those people who like brushes really heavily.
What does she? No, she just like files them into shivs to like stab Moondoggy with or something.
Maybe she's like
it's not a prison.
I was like, maybe she's one of those people who like chews on the head of a toothbrush.
That seems much more in character than the stabbing thing.
But yes, also a bit of an interesting like theme here of like the smell of the familiar, right? Like they
God.
say that like Eureka's wearing the jumpsuit because it smells like Renton.
Anime and
then
its weird obsession with smell.
And then we get a lot of descriptions of the smell of another man's chest later in the episode.
Yeah, that bit's weird.
I love how they do the fucking motorboating boob shot, but
Yes.
with Charles'
Charles'
rock
huge
hard
naturals.
abs. Yeah.
I mean, it's also a reminder that, hey, Renton's really kind of a shrimp for a 14-year-old, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, he's tiny, but, you
I
know...
mean, he's very childish, and like he blushes. He likes being hugged.
Yeah.
Like he is kind of soft little boy.
He's
right?
a soft boy, absolutely, yes. But,
Yeah,
you know...
I was saying, you know what? I can't even hate on it. Like, it's... Because, again, like, these episodes are maybe the most, like, childish... brackets non-derogatory I think we've seen Renton in some time.
I mean, look, the kids had a hard couple of weeks. And a hard life generally. It's nice to see him being loved. And speaking of being loved, in fact, in the space of, let's be generous and say it's been maybe a fortnight or something, but Charles and Ray are just ready to adopt him like fully.
It's a little like again. I love Ray and Charles, but like you can really tell like this sequence here is maybe the first of the like. I don't want to say cracks or like that they're secretly fucked up and sick in the head, but
they're coming on a little strong, right?
Yeah, right. Because basically, like Ray and Charles are like, "Well, Renton, you've been here for like under a month. You've been here for like 2 weeks. Are you ready to start calling us Mama and Papa?" It's like.
It's also funny because they're like, how much older than him are they? Like,
I mean, I think it's reasonable to say that they could be anywhere up to their early 40s.
Right.
They could conceivably be, like, I don't think it's an issue about...
I'll remind you, Ramba Ral died at the age of 35. So
okay, but nobody believes the ages.
I know. Just reminding you that guy was 35 when he died.
Yeah. Put it this way: I do not think that there's any issue that Ray and Charles could be his biological parents. Put it that way.
No.
Like,
I mean,
they are clearly old enough. But
my guess is like I don't know. Like I mean, well. You know, maybe Ray just has an otherworldly skincare routine, but Charles definitely reads as like early 40s, right?
Yeah.
Right.
There's also they're animated really like stretchily and bouncily here, which kind of again adds to the whole weird wacky comedy aspect of the scene.
Yeah.
Some great faces in this episode.
Yes. Oh, there's so many. There's a lot of like. Yes, Ray and Charles are great expression dispensers in this show. But yeah, they're like you can tell they're like. I mean, you know, the implication is Ray is at least a little tipsy here, right? Like they are nervous, a little embarrassed, maybe. Like, is this a little bit of liquid courage? Did Ray have a couple glasses of wine? It was like, fuck it, he's gonna be our son. Like, yeah. I already purchased the mug on the custom mug on Etsy.
Yeah.
You know,
where did you get this glazed mug with Renton on it? It's not exactly
it's
a
so
common
wild.
name.
Like, again, the passport. It's like, man, like, how fast are they? Like, where is Ray getting this shit? Like so quickly. You know, she's getting this shit express delivered to the Swan.
We have seen that mid-air deliveries are a thing, right? Like
totally.
People could totally have stuff like door dropped straight to their flying houses and stuff. So
they gotta support their fellow couriers.
Yeah. I will say that Renton's reaction here, where he's kind of like shocked and scared that he isn't being punished for what he did, is pretty relatable to anybody who has lived under a set of extremely strict guardians. Is all
definitely. It's very
trauma response.
Yeah, it's actually very relatable. Like I think like Renton's response here, right? Like he again, like it's like I think he's obviously still like, you know, even once like he's, you know, has a more genuine heart to heart with Charles. I think it's obviously he's still like weirdly like a little uncomfortable with like, you know, with going the full mama and papa. But like I think the interesting thing about what Renton expresses is it's not so much that he is like put off by the overfamiliarity as he is that just he's never had a relationship like this in his life. Right?
I
like
think
he didn't know his dad growing up. His grandpa was always like, cranky old man, right? Like
I think that's the thing which keeps this whole shebang on the right side of creepy, if that makes sense. As in, they're not asking him to replace his parental figures because he has never had those parental figures.
Right.
And that does make it a little bit more charming as opposed to creepy, let's say,
I think it's also just like that for Ray and Charles. Renton could be a way out, or at least a way towards a life that they maybe want more than being mercenaries. Like maybe they want to like settle down and just, enjoy domestic bliss, and that's why they're coming on a little bit strong. I don't know.
Well, I think as we unfortunately find out in this episode, right, the greatest tragedy of Ray and Charles is they cannot walk away, right? Well, I guess nobody can walk away, right? Like there is Charles is committed to the job they have been given, right? And like again, as kind of was implied, right, in the previous episode, right? There's Charles only took the job once he was told like Holland was involved, right?
Yeah.
Like we know that there is an unspoken tension, grudge, something going on there, right? And
my hatred for Holland is bigger than my love for Renton. Honestly, relatable.
A little bit, right? That's a little bit of what's going on here, right?
It does show us, the sort of the limits of what Ray and Charles are willing to do, right? Because I think, I am not a parent, but I don't think it's much of a stretch to say good parents will sacrifice anything for their children, right? They would do anything. And there are just some things that Ray and Charles will not do, right? And one of those things is let go of their way of life. And what that means is, in this crucial moment, they are putting their own wants and needs ahead of Renton's.
Right.
Because, like, the thing is almost that you almost seem to think that Ray and Charles only care about or only really interested in the, how should I call this, the superficial element of parenthood. The matching mugs and the having nice dinner parties and the calling us mama and papa. And perhaps they are not willing to understand that being a parent comes or is a multifaceted thing. Comes with other aspects.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that their affection is superficial. I think their affection
that's
is
not
real,
what I mean.
But I get what you're saying is that they are not willing to make sacrifices.
Right. And I think that's like the big thing here, right? Is because I think, again, I'm not going to be like, real parents or good parents. I'm not going to make any of those type of judgment calls. But I think if Ray and Charles were Renton's actual parents, and they had to make the choice between like giving up their own personal dreams to ensure Renton's own like livelihood and pursuing their own potentially self-destructive like grudge. I think, again, I don't know about but I think if they were actually his parents, that choice would be a lot more obvious to them, right?
Yes.
But what we kind of get here, and kind of like the kind of the the black pill, the truth of the matter by the end of this episode, right, is, I mean, Charles kind of lays it out. He's like, I care for you, Renton. I love you, but like at the end of the day, I'm gonna do this thing, and you can make your own decision, right? Like for better or worse, right? Like he gives Renton that choice, right?
Which is once again a very like mature thing, right? It is still a positive thing. That, like, this is what I mean by the other shoe never drops, right? In the end, they still kind of respect Renton, respect his decision, respect his agency. They do what is best for him in the situation in which they have to abandon him in order to do what it is that they want.
Right. And I think, yes, they clearly trust him and respect him enough to give him the free choice. But at the same time, they have been talking a lot about how Renton should just be a kid and shouldn't have to make decisions like that. And again, the moment that their livelihood, their grudge against Holland, their battle with Gecko State is put on the line, they basically ask him to make a my way or the highway choice, right?
Yes.
Like it is. This is the thing about Ray and Charles and why they are such good characters, right? Is that this works on multiple layers because they do love Renton. They clearly love Renton. When Charles tells Renton their real purpose and puts that choice before him, Ray is furious at him. She is hitting him and crying and because she really wanted them to stay together as a family. But they still do it. They still decide to put their, call it their job, their grudge, whatever you want. They still put that ahead of their duty of care to Renton, and whether you want to see that as they are giving him the freedom to make his own choice or they are abdicating their responsibility to look after him, those interpretations are both equally valid. And that's good because it means that there is a complexity to the situation.
Yeah. I'm afraid the thing they're trying to say here is that, like, perfect parents simply don't exist. They are also human. You cannot have parents who fully sacrifice themselves for the good of their children. And a parent who is strict and who tells you to sink or swim like Holland and the rest of the Gecko crew are not what you need, but maybe parents who spoil you and want you to stay a kid forever, and rob you of that agency are also not the ideal parents.
Yeah, I don't think Eureka 7 is necessarily trying to make a judgment call on either, like, Gecko State or Ray Charles as, like, this is, like, the right way to do things. I think
it's more like an idea of, like, you need, you young man, you need multiple parental figures in your life in order to become the multifaceted adult that you are destined to be.
It takes a village or whatever.
Right, it takes a village.
Yeah. I mean,
yes.
we have still not seen, where the Ray and Charles stuff is going to lead. So there is still, there are still multiple story possibilities. But clearly, this is another step in Renton understanding that his parental figures are not gods; they are not perfect. Right? He sees Ray and Charles now as people rather than sort of the ideal family that he saw them as before, and it's difficult, and again, I think the complexity and difficulty of the situation is what gives it its power, right? Because they clearly are upset to see him go, and they clearly do want him to stay, but at the same time, there's some sinister stuff here. Like the moment Charles learns his name, he doesn't tell him what's going on immediately. He pumps him for information first, and
I think that's, I think that's like kind of like, that is sort of the tragedy of circumstance, right? Because this sequence happens right after the, again, kind of goofy, kind of heartwarming Renton motorboating Charles sequence, right?
And then just like sitting on his lap while he pilots the spearhead. And I mean, like, again, maybe the culture is different, but 14's a little bit old to be sitting on your dad's lap like that.
I think that occurs a little later, right? What first goes on, right, is they're just like hanging out in the cockpit, right? And this is kind of where Renton finally casually drops his surname, right? Thurston, right? And Charles is instantly able to put together the dots. We get this tragic sequence where Ray drops this freshly baked pie. What a waste of a perfectly good pie.
Yeah, I mean that shit ain't easy, man.
Maybe the most distraught she has looked in the entire show with the oven mitts over her face when she hears the last name or overhears the conversation, right?
Yeah,
but,
and again, I think the key thing here is that it really is a showcase of Charles and Ray at their best and worst, right? Because let's give them credit here. They do not attempt to hide him or manipulate him to any great extent. They do come clean, and we get, we actually do get a little plot development as well, because Charles tells us we are working with the military to shepherd the gecko into a trap.
Yes.
You know, we are driving them into a corridor, and then we will destroy them. You know, and he is very unambiguous about that.
No,
You
I
know,
mean, he's very straight shooting with Renton on this, right? He's just like, yeah, kid, this is like the reality of like what Ray and I do, and you have to kind of make a decision, right? It is like to speak to the darkness of it, right? There's almost a little like, I mean, like from Charles's mind, he probably knew that they were never in any danger, but there's a little bit of a like almost like low key abusive element here, right? Where while they're like patrolling with the spearhead, right, and they get accosted by the Federation forces, right, and Charles just takes his hands off the controls, right, like.
and just hangs out for a while they're shooting missiles at them.
Yeah, and like Renton is like crying and begging. It's actually it's a hard scene to watch, right? Renton's like, I'll learn to call you Papa. Like, please tell me you're not gonna go after the gecko. Like, please tell me you're lying. Like, I'm begging you. Like, either like, please tell me you're lying, or more. Yeah, I think the subtext is more. Please just like drop the job. Don't take the job. Like, I'm begging you, don't go after the gecko. And
I mean, I think there's definitely an element of denial there. You know, he does say, please tell me this isn't true. Please, go back to pretending you're couriers or something like that.
He's just going through the 5 stages of grief all within the span of a single second.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yes. And
of course, in the end, he does decide to abandon his new life. In a very similar way to the way that he abandoned his old life, right? He has to step away from a found family again, and this is where we get the scene that we were talking about at the end of the discussion of last episode, where he asks Ray and Charles, "Did you know all along?" And this is kind of a multi-layered scene because Ray says, "Of course we knew all along. We were definitely manipulating you from the beginning," and she is so obviously saying it to save face, right? She is doing it to try and make it easier for Renton to leave them behind because she genuinely loves him. They both genuinely love him.
They do, and
but Charles did know from the beginning because he saw the wheel. Remember?
Yeah,
he saw the wheel, and so on some level, Charles actually did know all along. And again,
Charles, if he did not know who Renton was specifically, he knew that Renton was a member of Gecko State.
Yes. Right. I mean, if you put 2 and 2 together, right?
I don't know if Renton was necessary. I mean, I know he was on the cover of Ray Out, but like, I don't know like how.
Well, to be fair, he was disguised as an Italian then.
Yes, so. I don't know. Yes, exactly. I don't know what Renton's notoriety was as a member of the Gecko State, but
you could say like, oh, he's just a kid who reads Ray Out and who really likes the Gecko State as like the skater icons, but Charles probably knew, right, where he learned the thing with the wheel.
I think so. I mean, I think maybe in some ways what you kind of pick up from this, like the conclusion of this episode is like maybe both parties were like willing to like entertain the delusion, right? Like,
yeah, I think that's the right way of putting it, right? Both of them wanted to live inside the fantasy because it was appealing to them.
Yes,
right, and for that reason they were happy to ignore the warning signs, but circumstances have come to a point where it's not possible to maintain that happy lie anymore.
Yeah, it's a really. I mean, I really love like the stint with Ray and Charles and kind of like their involvement in this plot in Eureka 7. I think it's some of the. I think it's like some of the best like character storytelling that. Like some of the best that Eureka 7 has to offer, just like the dynamics at play here, the complexities of this relationship and like these people. Like, I mean, again, like Ray and Charles are broadly antagonists, right? They have been hired to take out the Gecko State, but like the ways in which again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but this is the power of 50 episodes, man. You can flesh out your antagonists like this.
Even taking the 50 episodes thing into account, we have spent remarkably little time with Ray and Charles in the grand scheme of things, but the show has done a great job of making them such deep and a lot of the time extremely likable characters, right?
Because they're just such a stark contrast to the almost like death march of abuse from the Gecko State we have endured for like 20 episodes.
Right, and this is how like writing a good ensemble means that your other character, the surrounding characters can bolster the characters you're focused on, right? Like we inherently like Ray and Charles because they represent such a marked shift from the Gecko State members we have been dealing with up to this point. And so we, like Renton, are seduced by their uncompromising love, their uncomplicated affection, all of that kind of stuff there. And so when he leaves, it is a wrench for us, the audience, as well, because they were happy and we want to see them happy.
Yeah, and I think it's so like important. I think we talked about this earlier. Like it's so important that like their parting is like tragic and unavoidable, but also like on like mutually respectful terms, right? Like Charles lays it out. Like, I'm going to attack the Gecko State at this time in this place. You are free to leave. You're free to stay. You're free to tell the Gecko State or not. All I care about is that whatever decision you make is the one that is true to your heart.
Yeah.
Right.
And leaving aside all the disclaimers and all the stuff we've talked about, it is a genuinely noble act. He does respect Renton enough to give him absolute agency.
Yes, in this moment,
this situation. And it's very difficult to see Renton again, like I said, cut himself off from this found family. Again, we deliberately mirror the shots of him leaving the gecko behind, I mean, without wishing to get a little too heavy on the imagery, but this episode is called Paradise Lost. It is a story about a fall. So, I want to talk a little bit about the gecko side of this episode as well. There's not too much of it, but we do see a little bit aside from the stuff we've already talked about, though. I want to point out that you can tell this is an anime written by Dai Sato because there is a scene where they are cleaning vinyl records, which is something only Dai Sato would put in there.
I mean, it's effective. I saw this and I'm like,
I should clean my records.
Yeah, should I clean my records?
But yeah, there is some important stuff here, which is the talk about. We get some talk about how, and there was, as you said regarding the last episode, G, there has been some subtext, some fairly heavy subtext up until this point about how Holland was not chosen and Renton is chosen, but they make it explicit here.
Right.
They make it explicit that it seems like Eureka has chosen Renton for some sort of task, and that Holland wanted to be chosen for that task, but he was not.
It is insane that they waited until episode 24 to explain what exactly the Amita drive does and why it is important.
That's literally what I was about to say.
No, it was pretty much clear, right? I mean, but that is just how this show works. Like, something will be in the show for like 20 episodes until they actually like sort of acknowledge and really like solidify what it is and what role it plays in the story.
The concept in mecha anime or mecha period of like drift compatibility is as old as the genre itself, right?
Vote a few dances if you want to win.
Yes, the idea that like you can only draw out the true power of the robot when all of its pilots are operating in perfect sync, right? And
I've seen Pacific Rim.
Yes, I mean, I say drift compatibility for a reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, yes, the reveal that yes, the Amita drives power can't be drawn out except when Eureka and Renton are working in concert, right? And that does not include Holland.
Yes, and I think the fact that they lay it out in text here is more just kind of like if you haven't got it by this point, we should probably just shove it straight in your eyeballs, right? But most of the stuff said here is something that anybody who's been paying attention has kind of worked out by this point. I want.
And now this show just becomes that meme of like, I consent. Isn't there somebody you forgot
Oh
to
my God.
ask?
Well, great. Now I have to Photoshop that up. But yes, we also see that Talho is a big fan of Wuno magazine that she's reading there. And also we get a return of the persistently mentioned but not yet appeared Master Norb.
Mentioned.
Yes, Norb or Norbu as they spell him on the screen. But yes, Holland reveals that Hap has been looking into the whereabouts of Master Norb, and it seems like he will have some importance in our future endeavors there.
And you do get a brief shot first during like the montage of the Gecko State doing things and being sad. There's like a little shot of Hap looking into Norb.
Yeah, and then we get explicit confirmation towards the end of the episode there. And this episode ends on quite an important pledge, which is Holland says to Eureka he'll bring Renton back.
Yeah.
Which, clearly he has done some soul searching and has been called out repeatedly by Talho.
And he's had to sleep on the couch for 3 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, look, you can trust Holland to do the right thing when all other options have been exhausted. So.
Once you have browbeaten him enough, yes, he will eventually get around to doing the right thing.
we end this pair of episodes in a place of transition, really. The Gecko State has a new mission, which is to find Renton. Renton himself is sort of adrift again, right? I mean, we have some gorgeous imagery at the end here where, we have been mostly in cities and the Swan, and Renton once again lands in what looks like a blasted wasteland, basically, but just kind of, some on the nose Paradise Lost imagery there. He fell from heaven to hell and all that kind of stuff, but he is once again kind of at a loose end. He has no idea where to go or what to do. And Charles and Ray, and the military are lurking in the background. They're moving their plot forward. It seems like confrontation will be inevitable at some point there. Final thoughts on this couple of episodes there?
I think this was a really strong set of episodes, as usual.
Yeah.
Like, we, as we have discussed before, we got a lot of characterization for Ray and Charles in a very short amount of time, but the show was able to coast on the work it has done so far to be able to add new pawns to that game and immediately set them in the position where we care about what's going to happen to them next. I think the show also does a very good job at making us feel for Renton without becoming too misery porny, which may have been a bit of an issue in the arc before this. And it's not necessarily that this arc is more lighthearted than the one where they were all stuck in the mine and everyone was depressed all the time. Like, most of these episodes still end with Renton heartbroken and his image of the world once again shattered into a million pieces. But I think they offer enough, like, almost say diversity in the tragedy, and still offer him like agency to keep that interesting, at least.
Yeah, the show is beginning to diversify its emotional texture, right? It's beginning to, now that we know the characters really well, it's able to leverage some of that development, cash some of those checks, and sort of spread the palette of stuff we're seeing wider. So, we're seeing joy, we're seeing sorrow, triumph, tragedy. The canvas of the writing has expanded quite a bit. And I think these episodes are a really good example of how, even though they are relatively uneventful in terms of actual plot motion, there's still a huge amount of stuff happening in the character stories which make them very compelling viewing.
And we get such complex relationships that just keep viewers endeared to the characters, even if they may not always make the right or the rational decisions, right? There is the loneliness and the inability to connect, despite the desire to connect between Renton and Eureka. There is the both, like, the antagonism of Holland towards everyone else that is both tragic and funny at this, like, but funny in a sort of pathetic kind of way. There is the whole thing.
A lot of the humor in these 2 episodes is fairly dark, let's say.
Yeah. And there's the whole thing with Ray and Charles that we can't stop talking about. It's like they have really leveled up their game in, like, going from very sort of simple, easily identifiable relationships and bonds between the characters to things that you can, like, genuinely spend 1.5 hours per 2 episodes discussing and picking apart, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, G, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you guys have mostly covered it. Like, in terms of, like, moment to moment, like, action, these are, like, fairly, like, uneventful episodes. But again, I would never call these episodes filler, but these are episodes why I so vigorously champion the, like, full length TV run. Again, like, yes, you could say that, like, in the grand scheme of things, Renton only spent, like, 3 or 4 episodes with Ray and Charles, but, like, you know, by modern anime standards, that's like a third of a cour. You know, like that's a significant amount of time, actually. And I think, hell, you know, you don't even need 50 episodes, right? I would even argue that, like, this time that Renton spends with Ray and Charles shows that, like, you can actually be fairly economic with your storytelling and character building and still build, like, relationships.
That's the thing, right?
I
think the golden standard for this is Kaworu in Evangelion, right? Who shows up for, like, half an episode, but
dude's there for, like, 17 minutes.
Of how, like I said, all the pawns have been placed in that show up until then. Now you could just add one, and immediately everything falls into place, and you become invested in that character and what what they mean for the other characters. And I think this is another example of that.
Yeah,
right. And,
like, maybe I'll save it for the next podcast, but I will say, like, if you actually ask me, like, what is, like, my strongest memory of Eureka 7, like, I would say starting from Ray and Charles till, like, the halfway point of this show, like, this stretch of episodes. Again, I don't know if that's, like, the best part of Eureka 7, but it is the one that endures the most strongly in my memory. And I think a lot of that is on the back of the work they do with the characters during this leg of
absolutely. I would
story.
agree with that. I think that this arc is one of the arcs which is very clear to me in my memory, you know, and obviously I did not remember many of the fine details, but I very strongly remember the Ray and Charles arc as being like a pinnacle of the show's character writing and sort of human drama there. It's a very memorable sequence of episodes. Yeah, it's good stuff there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we will have to see where that goes in our next couple of episodes. So next time, we will be covering episode 25 and episode 26. We will be past the halfway point of the show. Kind of scary, huh?
Yeah. Brave New World.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's do a little housekeeping before we wrap up here. Thank you to everybody who has been commenting on YouTube and on the blog, by the way. I will get to those comments as soon as I can. I'm just not very good at this kind of thing, but we really appreciate everybody who's left us a comment or everybody who's said some kind words about the show. We really, really love that. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, Stitcher. You can leave us a comment on the blog or on the YouTube page, and like I said, I will try and reply to those ASAP. And just before we go, I'd like to thank Aqua. Thank you, Aqua.
You're welcome.
I'd like to thank G. Thanks, G.
Yeah, thank you, guys, and yeah, thanks to the people who like our aimless ramblings about Eureka 7 enough to say something nice about it. Or hell, just the people who, you know, all you people out there who still hold that candle for Eureka 7. This is it's an old show, but it's a classic for a reason. And I think these latest episodes have really been illustrating that.
And yeah, we'll see all of you next time. Thanks. Take care.
Bye.